So, welcome to today's show. Today we have Reneau Peurifoy on the show. He's a counsellor and an author. So, welcome to today's show, Reneau.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Absolutely. So, talk to me about your new book then, first and foremost. What is
Well,
it?
it's called Why You Feel the Way You Do, and it's actually the result of all the years I've been spending in counseling and just studying all this stuff. So it's kind of a journey. It starts off with talking about the seven emotions that we share with other animals, and then goes from there to talks about negative triggers and core response patterns and how you change them. And then the last section talks about the three things that make people happy, the three most important things that positive psychology has come up with over the last 20 years.
So, let's break that down then. So, you talked about the seven emotions that we share with other animals. What are they?
Yeah. Well, and again, this is fairly new stuff. I know when I was in college taking psychology courses, the things that they taught me are all obsolete nowadays. But yeah, neuroscience has got in it and it's been investigating. And we have the anger and the fear to danger. That's everybody's familiar with that. And there's a second fear fear circuit called panic, or we tend to know it as separation anxiety in children, and it's what causes us to miss people when they're away. And then there's a corresponding circuit to that called the caring circuit. And those two kind of work together to help bind us together. You can see this in little kids. When a kid falls down or something, all the other kids become very concerned about it. And then, other animals, you see the same thing going on when the young one has a distress call, then the parent, it triggers that caring feeling in you. Oxytocin is one of the things that mediates that circuit. Again, it's more complex than just that. But when you take, for example, children who've been raised in orphanages where they were never touched or cared for, this was true for some of the children who come out of Eastern Europe in the past, and you put them with a parent and they're playing a game on a video or something, there's no oxytocin levels rise. But if you take like a child that's been, natural child, the oxytocin levels just go off the chart. So again, it shows that these circuits can be damaged by the way a person comes up through childhood. So is that interaction between genetics and environment. One of the more interesting circuits for me was the seeking circuit. And if you watch any baby, whether it's a human baby or a puppy or a kitten or whatever, they just want to explore the environment. And it's a drive inside of us that causes us to want to just explore things and see what's out there. And that's why when you go to a new situation, the first thing you do is you kind of just check everything out. And let me back up, because I probably should have mentioned to start with that these are what neuroscience calls affects, and affects push you to do something. So the simplest ones are the sensory affects, like heat, pressure, hot and cold. If I'm really cold, I really have a strong desire to get warm, right? Or if I'm very hot, I want to get cold. And then the next level up are your homeostatic affects, which are things like hunger and thirst. If I'm really thirsty, then I have that drive to go out and get something to drink. Or if my salt balance is out of balance, or my not getting enough nutrition, then I have that desire to go eat something. So emotions are kind of just a higher level of affect, and they get hooked into our belief systems. And as we grow up, especially with humans, we're different from animals because we have this top part of our brain, this big thinking part. And so all these things are kind of mediated through that thinking part of the brain. So they get modified in terms of how they respond and how we respond to them, depending upon our upbringing, our belief systems, cultural things of that nature.
So you mentioned the puppy. It's quite funny because I've got two dogs. One is about 6 years old, and he's the father to the puppy that we've now got. And he's going through that. He's only roughly 12 or 13 weeks, and he's going through that exploratory stage now. When it's a case of, I don't know if you've seen that meme, the more we fuck about, the more we learn. And
Right.
it's definitely the case with puppies. They try chewing things, they try eating stones and chewing stuff
Yep.
in the house and putting down the toilet roll. And only then do they learn this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. So you mentioned there
Well,
quite.
and one circuit I didn't mention was the play circuit. And you can take like rats, for example, and cut off the top part of their brain, the thinking part, and they still want to play.
Yeah.
And that's how we learn social limits. When your kid
Yeah.
are starting to poke you and play too much, that's when you say, okay, that's too much. But
Yeah.
we still have that circuit as adults. We still want to play.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the rats. Actually, I've got a good study that I learned about is that you get big rats and you get small rats, obviously.
Uh,
And the big rats, well, animals in general like to play and wrestle, whether you have brothers, whether it's puppies,
yeah,
whether it's bears, whether it's rats. And
yeah,
the big rat actually lets the smaller rats beat them 30% of the time. Because
yeah,
if they beat the small rats all of the time,
yeah,
it gets it doesn't become fun for the big rat because he just wins all the time. And it doesn't become fun for the small rats because they never get to win anything. And after a while, it gets boring and they get demoralized. So
right.
they let them win 30% of the time to keep that partner to allow them to keep playing. So I just thought that would be an interesting point on
That
that.
important point for parents with little kids. You need to let them win sometimes,
Yeah, exactly. You've got to let
and
them sometimes, but
at the
not
same
too
time,
much.
they got to lose sometimes. But when my kids were little, we'd play checkers, and the way I worked it is, if I won 2 games in a row, I would take one of the checkers off the board, and I would keep doing that till I was down to like maybe 4 or 5 checkers. And of course, then they could win easily, right? Then if they would win 3 times, I would put 1 checker back on the board, and so that's kind of how we handicapped it. So they could win and I could win. And, of course, it got really challenging if you only have 4 or 5 checkers on the board to try to beat the other side.
Yeah, definitely make it more challenging, as we said about the
Yeah.
rat situation. It's pretty similar there, isn't it? Let them win. Sometimes you
Yep.
win, sometimes so they learn both sides of
Yep.
the coin. So you talked about the seven emotions, as it were, and obviously everyone's familiar with these emotions. What's the way that we can use them to our ability? What's the way that we can build resilience to them or use them in a way that's going to give us the best outcome?
Well, I think understanding them is that these are all human needs. It kind of gets into the things that make us happy. The big one by far is relationship. No matter where you read, you find that human beings need contact with other human beings in a deep, meaningful way. And if we don't have that, especially as we grow up, if we don't have that, it causes us to get a little bit weird. Our wiring just gets really thrown off. You see this in kids, again, the ones where they were never touched or tended to when they cry. They learn that their cries have no meaning,
Yeah,
and so they just don't attach to their parents, and they have a hard time attaching to others as an adult.
yeah,
Um, so I think that's one of the things. I mean, the second one is, of course, purpose. We have to have purpose in life, a reason to get up in life in the morning, and that can be a narrow purpose. I just want to, be a good parent, or I just want to be good at my job, or it can be a larger purpose. I want to do something that's going to help people. And then, of course, the third one is meaning. How do we put all this stuff into context? When things go south and not working well for me, how do I make sense out of that in my life? And again, if you look at our younger generation, what are they lacking? They're lacking relationship, they're lacking purpose, and they're lacking meaning. And it's small wonder why there's so much anxiety and depression going on, and why there's so much crazy anger going on around the world. That seems to be escalating the more we get into the internet and just all this stuff and get more separated from one another.
yeah. Definitely. Obviously, the Maslow hierarchy of needs is quite a well-known pyramid, isn't it? In terms of you need the basics before you move up to
Well,
activation right at the top.
and again, you're talking about Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. He actually had it upside down because his whole thing was all about self-actualization, being all I can be. And really, the core thing, if you look at the base of the pyramid, is that relationship stuff. People
Yeah,
will
exactly.
sacrifice everything for relationship. They'll run into a burning building. You get into things like, again, purpose and meaning, patriotism, what people do in warfare or to maintain a cause. These are the things that are really important to people.
Yeah. And it's like the other thing that you mentioned, the solitude, well, the touch example, obviously solitary confinement is a punishment they use in prisons because people come out of that not feeling in a good mental space because they need that human interaction, they need that touch. And what you'll find as
Yeah.
well is people who are quite lonely, they spend a lot of time watching TV, listening to the radio, which is sort of a synthetic way of getting some sort of
Yeah.
social interaction. And the other one that you mentioned is the meaning side. And Viktor Frankl talks about this, doesn't he, in his
Yeah.
book Man's
Yeah.
Search for Meaning, where he's
Yeah.
he's in the camps, but because he has an inherent purpose, he doesn't feel the negative effects that maybe some of his comrades feel. And do you think that's probably the biggest one out of the three in terms of being able to, in any situation, feel as good as you can feel?
it's important. And one of the things that I point to in the book is, we live in a culture now where everything's very mechanistic. Where there is no God, there is no life after death. You're a little machine, you die, you're dead. And I like to point people to some of the near-death experience research that's been going on. In fact, I quote one of the big ones that has basically concluded at the end, we have no explanation for what these things are, and that they certainly seem to indicate that there is something when you die.
Yeah.
And if there is something when you die, then that behooves us to maybe take a look at how we're living now. Is there something beyond just getting all I can get and having as much pleasure as I can get, which
Yeah.
seems to be that hedonistic Stoic kind of philosophy is so prevalent nowadays.
Yeah, I think for me, I never used to believe that there was and I don't like the word, well, I do, but it has negative connotations, doesn't it? The word God in terms of the religion side of things, and as you said, life after
Oh,
death.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if we think about your phone and your house and even the laptop that we're sitting in front at the moment, it has an inherent design. It has to be designed because of the functionality, because of its dimensions,
yeah,
etc. And if
yeah,
people can agree that that is created, but then they disagree that something as complex as the human body with limbs and the brain function and circulatory system that isn't created, I find that strange. And coming back to your point with life after death, as you said, there is some commonalities with those experiences. For example, people say that their life flashes before their eyes. Now, is that a way of God judging your life very quickly? Possibly. No one knows. And it's like if we created the camera, we can look back at the film and look at what was recorded. So
hmm
my metaphor is that saying, okay, well, you were created. Can the person who created you look back and see what you saw through your camera lens, as it were? And maybe that's why there is that your life flashes before your eyes. So there's a quick judgment to see all the good things and bad things that you've done, and you to feel, yeah, how did I perform really?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, again, I come from a science background. As biology was my major, but I also had chemistry and math minors. And one of the things since 2000 is biology is really at a loss to figure out how life originated. And all of the theories, with the primeval soup and all that type of stuff have all fallen apart. And you just get into all the intricacies. For example, the moon. The moon is such a unique thing. I remember when I was in high school, the textbooks are all speculating how did the moon get there. Of course, now we pretty much kind of figure out that the planetoid about the size of Mars, crashed into the Earth somewhere about 4.5 billion years ago when the crust was forming, and that's why we had Pangea, the big
Yeah,
continent,
country. Yeah,
and all that stuff. So you get into more and more things and the uniqueness. Boy, we could talk a lot about some of that stuff. It's but maybe this gets taken a little beyond where we need to go. But yeah, it's the idea of design and the idea that there is something more than just the physical stuff that we deal with, and it's so easy to ignore the invisible aspects of the world.
yeah, 100%. And I think that the word science for me again has some negative connotations where people think that it has to be proved to be seen as correct. Now, before things are proved, they still exist, but they just don't have it sort of signed off. And even when things are signed off, they can be incorrect and they get changed. So, for example, quantum physics has basically got rid of a lot of the old science because it shows that there's a lot more to the space that we're a part of than maybe meets the eye. Like I don't know if you've seen the double slits experiment or the particle entanglement experiments, and they show something very different to what people tend to see in terms of physical objects and obviously vibrations and all that sort of stuff. So
Right.
it's very, for me, you have to have some element of faith in terms of what your beliefs are because
Mhm.
not everything can be physically proven.
Yeah, although there's a thing with theories is a theory. Can you falsify it?
Yeah.
Any good theory, it'll make predictions, and if those predictions don't come true, then you have to throw it out and come up with something new.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a hypothesis cannot be no, it cannot be proved beyond its hypothesis. You
yeah,
can't prove it beyond what it's trying to prove, and I think that can be the issue because sometimes when you're trying to prove something, it's like the cognitive bias situation where you try and force square pegs into a round hole to fit your
yeah.
narrative.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting a little far afield, but I think people do need to come up with some way of looking at life and the world that's going to help them have some kind of context. Again, when bad things happen, or just to make sense out of all the stuff that's going on around you in the world. And if you don't have that, or if it's a very superficial, belief system, then you do fine as long as everything's going well. But then as soon as, you have a loss in life, you lose your work, you lose somebody that's important to you, or things of that like that happen, then you really get thrown into crisis. And like you mentioned, Viktor Frankl, people who had some sense of meaning did better under the severe circumstances that they were in than those who didn't.
Yeah. So you've been a counsellor, obviously, I think you mentioned for 20
Mhm.
years or so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I worked with anxiety disorders was my main thing. So
What did you learn? Like, if someone was to say, give me the biggest gem of knowledge in terms of how people can get from a position from wherever they are, whether that's, if we look at a scale from 1 to 10, whether they're at a 1 out of 10 in terms of mental stability, let's say, or to someone who's 9, how do they get from that level to the next level in terms of being in the best psychological state they can be? Is it
uh,
looking at the optimistic side of life? Is it maybe looking at some philosophy? Is it maybe religion or meaning, or some of the other points that you mentioned?
I used to joke with my clients, the answer is always E. And on multiple choice questions, E usually is all of the above, right?
Yeah, yeah,
There's not a simple one shoe fits all answer to everybody. Certainly, having a balanced life is important. Those things we talked about, having relationships. If you have 3 people in your life that you can be totally honest with and talk about the ups and downs in life, uh, that right there is going to do more than anything else for your mental health. I mean, counselors a lot of times are paid friends. We're somebody that people can come to and be totally honest with, and we can act as that reflecting board to them.
yeah,
And it used to be in times past, you had lots of people like that. People lived in close communities.
yeah,
Uh, if there was somebody you could go to talk to, if not to your own family, there's the village elder, or your uncle, or somebody that you could go talk to about stuff, and they could give you advice. And there was a sense of connection that we don't have nowadays. Even in the recent past, you had your block, or your relatives that were relatively close by. So I think that's in terms of mental health, one of the things that you can do that's more than anything else.
yeah,
You go to countries, developing countries where they don't have all the stuff that we have, and yet a lot of times they're happier than we are because they have that close knit community, and they have a sense of purpose and meaning that helps to shield them from the hardship that sometimes that they're experiencing in daily life.
yeah.
Uh,
I think with the council example, I think you're right in terms of the closest of communities. That is one thing, but also I think the uptick in councils or coaches, because I obviously work as a coach as well, is because of the lack of judgment. If you know someone, maybe they would judge you less favorably if they understood what your thought process was. So maybe it's to save face on that basis. The other point that you made with regards to developing countries, a lot of the time it's because if you're not happy with what you've got, you're never going to be happy with whatever you've got. So everything you have, that's you specifically or me, someone else is jealous of. You live in a first world country, you have your own house or your own car or have a dog, or you have a job working somewhere. Someone else is jealous of that particular thing that you have, or you have a full head of hair or whatever. So you need to sometimes understand that, as opposed to always thinking about what you don't have and actually being happy with what blessings you do have.
brings us back to meaning, right? What
Yeah.
is life all about? Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? Yeah, and I think we're getting back to those things like, who am I? What makes me important? Is it because I have a big car, or because I have a big house, or are there other things that you know make me valuable as a human being? You deal a lot with that when you get in with people who are very perfectionistic and stuff.
Yeah.
They're always judging themselves and their value by external things as opposed to internal things.
But is that perfectionism or is that materialism?
Well, it's both. It's both. I mean, with anxiety disorders, a lot of times I'd get people who are very perfectionistic and material at the same time. But again, for them, doing things correctly was so important.
I
And
mean,
the fact,
I've had a few clients just to sort of touch on that point. I've had some clients that are again perfectionists, and the question I say to them that really helps them to maybe change their perception slightly is, would you describe anything as perfect?
well,
And they would
I
say
used,
no. And then I would say, okay, well, if nothing is perfect, why do you strive for perfection if you can agree that nothing is perfect? And they think, oh, hang on a minute, that's so
yeah,
true that I'm striving for something that I understand deep within myself that cannot be achieved. Therefore, I maybe need to change my perception. And actually, those perfectionists can be ones who procrastinate more or don't make decisions because they are always waiting for quote unquote the perfect time. There is
right.
no such thing as a perfect time. The perfect time is to act is now.
You're saying it a little bit differently from what I used to do, but I used to tell them, you know, if your goal is perfection, you've guaranteed failure.
Yeah.
Because again, as you just said, nothing is perfect in life. You know, the other thing that I used to talk to people about is, okay, so let's say you have a friend who makes a mistake or messes up. Do you now just no longer count them as a friend and you shun them? And usually they would say no. And so why is that? It's because, you know, human life has value and relationship has value that's separate from what you do as a human being.
Yeah.
Again, it's that idea of separating what you do from who you are. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a human being, I have value. What I do sometimes has value, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does well, and sometimes it doesn't, but that's a separate issue from who I am.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing that I found to be very important for people is to start to understand the difference between what they do and who they are.
Yeah, I love that because I'm writing. Well, I've written a first book. Obviously, everyone will know about it's Become a Person of Value, and it's a self-help book. The second book I've written, which is currently undergoing editing, is a question a day, and one of the questions
Mm.
is similar to that. Really, is like, who am I? Most people would say, oh, I'm this person who works here and I earn this amount and I'm this, and they're just labels. Who are you really is maybe separate to the car that you drive, as you alluded to, or the house that you have.
Mhm.
We need to establish who we are and what we want to bring to the world. As you said, all of that other stuff is maybe external. Are you a strong believer then that asking questions is important to
Oh
find
yeah.
answers?
Yeah, I mean it's part of the process that you go throughout your life. It never ends, you know. It's always trying to expand, you know, your understanding of who you are and how you fit into things and just learning to enjoy things. I mean that ability to have that deep sense of contentment regardless of your circumstances is if you can achieve that, then you do really well in life.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that doesn't mean I don't want to have successes. You know, I don't want to win. I mean, I like to win when I'm playing games and
yeah,
stuff,
exactly.
but if I lose, that's okay too, you know.
Yeah, I think with winning and losing, I think sometimes we need to understand that to win the overall war, we have to lose many battles along the way. Like for
Oh
example, if you
yeah,
want to become the world champion boxer or MMA fighter or kickboxer or judoka or whatever,
yeah,
you
yeah,
need to have like if you're a boxer, for example, the world champion boxer has been punched in the face more times than me or you, but he's there, but he's better still because he's
yeah.
learned from that mistakes and he's moved forward. Just coming back to anxiety for a minute, because I know that's quite a strong point for you. I heard a sort of description really before that anxiety is someone who lives in the future. Depression is someone who lives in the past, and obviously living in the present is a present because it's a gift. Do you subscribe to that theory, or do you have a different view on what anxiety actually is?
Well, I think it's a oversimplification. Anxiety is a form of fear. Okay, and again, when there are threats, you respond with either anger or fear. And anger can range from irritation to rage, and fear can range from anxiety to panic, right? So, really, the core issue is threat. And where's the threat coming? The other wrinkle that needs to be thrown in here is I worked a lot with people who had panic disorder. And
Yeah,
with panic disorder, they had a different wiring in their body. Um, Everything that human beings have, you can put on the old normal curve. So there's tall people, there's short people, and there's the average height, right?
the bell curve.
So, so in terms of the reactivity of your body, it's the same thing. Some people have very reactive bodies, and some people you got to slap them upside the head to get them to notice something. So with a lot of the people that I worked with, their body was kind of like a house where the wiring is not quite up to code. And so when they got too much stress going on, then the fight or flight response would start to trigger, which is really the sensation of anxiety. It's that fight or flight response. In fact, I found that that wiring for them was actually a blessing in disguise, because it was that sensitivity was the thing that other people liked best about them. They tended to be very empathetic. They tended to be good listeners. It's the thing that other people, their kids, their mate, their friends liked about them, that sensitivity. But the downside was they got overwhelmed very easily. And
Yeah.
typically I would talk to them and I'd say, okay, so tell me, when your panic attack started. And they would say things like, well, I was working full time, going to school full time. Let's see, my dad was trying to care for my dad who was dying. And then, oh yeah, and my boyfriend, he decided he didn't want to get married. I don't understand why I was having a panic attack. It's like, he said, wait a minute. I think I can figure this one out. What they had was a stress reaction, but they were so out of touch with what was going on in their body, they didn't understand it. And so it frightened them. And so they would start running from the sensations, and they would start doing a lot of what's called what if thinking, negative anticipation. Well, what if it's this? What if it's that? Oh my gosh. And then as soon as they would notice, and then they would start doing internalization, they would start watching their body, which is something we typically don't do. And then whenever they noticed anything out of the unusual, then they would start to say, oh my gosh, I wonder if that thing's happening. And of course, they could actually start to generate panic attacks just from that kind of worry and that negative anticipation and internalization that was going on.
Yeah.
And so unwinding that was important, but also understanding that, that those were symptoms a lot of times that they weren't taking care of business. And this was a lesson, I think, for everybody, but for them, it was essential, is they had to keep short accounts. When they started to get symptoms, it meant there was something in their life that they weren't dealing with. Oftentimes it was relationship issues. And so, that was something that as they started to learn, okay, this is something I need to deal with. And if I don't, it's going to come up as free floating anxiety because of the threat that's
Yeah.
there. And instead of focusing on the anxiety, I need to come back and decide, okay, what's going on? And so I'd say, okay, let's go through the checklist. Okay, how are my relationships? How's the kids? How's work going? How are my life goals? Has there been a big disappointment lately? And always, bingo, one of those things would come up, right? Okay. And so tell me about that. Well, it wasn't that big a deal. Well, okay, the anxiety you're experiencing is telling me it was a big deal. So you need to deal with it. And we need to
Yeah.
come up with a plan for how we're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I did
Yeah.
with those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, people's strengths can be their biggest weaknesses, can't they? Like, if you're super fast, a lot of the time you're going to be weak because you have to be light and nimble. If you're super strong, you might be
Yeah.
slow because obviously the build. And I think, as you said as well, with people who are anxious, it's as you said, it's the unknown outcomes, isn't it? It's the fact that they are unsure. What if this happens? What if that happens? Whereas when you have clarity of this is going to happen, even if it's a bad thing, it's like, oh, I know what I'm dealing with now. I know what I need to do, and I can act accordingly. I love what you said about not dealing with something, and that's what plays on your mind because we've all been there at some point when we have this thing in the back of our mind. Maybe we know what it is, maybe we don't, but there's something tugging away at us that we know we need to do.
Yeah.
How do we tap into if we are unsure? I mean, you sort of alluded to it, but I want to get a bit more of a categoric answer. How do
Well,
we find out what that is and then, as you said, devise a plan to get there?
well, I think there's two parts to it. Number one is when you just deal with the whole concept of stress and those types of things, is I think it's good for people to come up with their stress indicators. Everybody has something they do when something's bugging them or they're under stress. Uh, and it might be a behavioral thing, might be something going on in their body. With me, I'll start spending time playing some stupid video game. Sometimes I'll joke that there can be a change in how I use language, and you have to understand my dad was a career Navy guy, so
Navy
you know,
Goggins style.
so some of that would come in. And so when I noticed that, and oftentimes, my wife is very good at pointing that out too. They're wonderful in that way. It means there's something I need to take care of. And so, like I said, you go through an inventory. Okay, so what's been going on lately in my life? Has there been a loss? Has there been a disappointment? Is there something going on with a relationship or work? For example, I've got a really good friend who moved away. And so I find myself kind of open about doing some of my anxiety, stress stuff. So I start thinking about what's going on. Well, okay, my friend went away. So what might be, relationship, a primary relationship is gone. So the need that needs to be taken care of is I need to find either a new friend, I need to somehow connect with them over the internet, but there's that need, and that's what's generating what's going on. And so I find going through that inventory is one of the key things that people can do, and that we just don't do very, very often.
Yeah.
And if something's going on and you're telling yourself, well, it wasn't that big a deal, but I'm reacting as if it was a big deal, well, then it was a big deal.
Yeah.
So to address the need that whatever it is that's related to that.
Yeah, I love that. I use something called a wheel of life with clients where it
Mhm.
shows the different areas of your life. So, as you said, relationships, business, finances,
Right.
hobbies, interests, goals, travel, all of these different areas. And what you tend to find is a skew in a particular area. So, for example, some people might be very relationship, social, hobbies heavy, but they are short on their finances and their business and their career goals. And on the flip side, it's the other way around, isn't it? It's people who are too career focused, too focused about money, but actually are depriving themselves of relationships, of friendship, of social, of hobbies.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's about getting that balance. And yes, it's always going to have a certain tilt, isn't it? Because you don't get to the top career wise if you don't prioritize that at the sacrifice of some other stuff, and vice versa. But it's about that balance and understanding what is it I want, what end result do I want? And if you do want to have a family and kids, you can't just be 100% career focused. Do you find that it's about matching up those goals with the the realistic expectation of something happening, and also the habits and routines that people do?
Well, yeah, of course. And that changes over life too. It's almost
Yeah,
like you're on a, kind of on a balancing board or something, and you go one direction for a while, and then you realize, oh, gee, I need to go back the other direction in a while. And that's just life. It's that undulation that we go through of ups and downs through life, and making those course corrections. And what you need when you're 20 is different from what you need when you're 30, 40, or 50. And those course corrections, again, requires us to take some time to do a little bit of introspection, again, which is we're very short on nowadays because we spend so much time trying to entertain ourselves, with the internet, with TV, or video, or whatever, games, and the art of being quiet, which is why the whole mindfulness, I think, movement is so popular with so many people. Just the idea of being quiet. I mean, we used to have lots of time to be quiet. If I went into town, it would take me an hour to go into town, and I had a lot of time to talk to whoever I was going into town with. There were no distractions. There wasn't a radio on my, horse or whatever. Uh, so that taking time and building that into your daily life, I think, is so important.
yeah. I mean, one of the things I like, and you talked about course correction, and
Mhm.
at every sort of checkpoint saying, is this the direction I want to go? No, okay, let's change the degree of direction by 1 degree or 5 degrees, or do a complete 90-degree turn. One
Mhm.
thing, and it's a phrase that I was reading the other day, is why are we looking backwards though? Why are we looking backwards at life? Because that's not the direction we're headed. We're not going backwards in time, we're going forward. So why are we so focused on the past? Did you find that as a counselor that people or clients and people you were dealing with were so focused on what happened in the past that they were missing the future planning?
Well, sometimes I think, again, it's hard to put everything into, everybody into just a narrow box. Certainly with anxiety clients, a lot of what they're focused on is anxieties over the future. And again, those threats, whether they're real or imaginary, and then figuring those out. And, and it's okay to look in the past and enjoy some of the stuff in the past, and because that's where we learn things, as long as you don't get stuck there. Again, I think there's a balance between, appreciating where you've come from and learning lessons from that, and also taking a look at where you want to go in the future.
Yeah,
But at the same time, enjoying the now,
yeah,
taking time to, one of the things that positive psychology talks about is savoring, taking time to savor the now, whether that's just, sitting there and eating your breakfast, or whether it's going to a game or being with somebody.
yeah,
And that's an art that a lot of people are very poor at, is
yeah,
because they're so busy either in the past or in the future, or just being busy.
yeah. Living in the present and enjoying the moment. Out of your book, then, what's the one for you, your favorite part, and the one sort of crucial piece of advice or topic area that you feel that everyone should know about, or have you already discussed that?
Well, I mean, it's again, I go back to E, all of the above. Uh, I mean, the current book is the one is my favorite one. It could just talk because that whole issue of emotions has been something I've been fascinated with all my life. When I was a kid, my parents they both came from farming backgrounds, and we had enough area where I raised chickens and rabbits and different things and teaching tricks and things. And I often joke that I went from animal behavior, that I studied in college, to human behavior when I got my counseling degree. Uh, and I think this whole area of relationship, purpose, meaning is a real key to understanding how I can learn to have a happy and balanced life and have that contentment regardless of my circumstances. Doesn't mean I don't want to improve, I don't want to do things, but at the same time, taking time to savor where I'm at and enjoy the people that are around me,
Yeah.
rather than this mad dash to constantly be entertained. I mean, that's the addiction of the modern world, is entertainment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's been said that there's entertainment and education, isn't there, when you're consuming stuff, and people tend to go towards entertainment. And if you are going to distract yourself, for me anyway, at least educate yourself and learn something, whether it's from external sources or internal. So if people want to learn more about you or get your book, or maybe, I don't know if you're still offering counseling sessions, but get in touch with you about counseling, where can they reach out to you?
Just go to my website. It's whyemotions.com. So easy to remember, whyemotions.com. And you find out about my books. I've got some freebie stuff there. I've got some connection into things I've done on YouTube. So, it's you'll find it all there at whyemotions.com. And I think you'll enjoy some of the stuff you'll see there.
Fantastic. Any final messages for the listeners?
Well, I think life is a process, and it's a process of learning and experiencing. And if you're having difficulties and struggling, there's hope. And if you're really feeling overwhelmed, reach out to somebody, a counselor, a coach, or somebody that you can maybe talk to about and get some tools, because there are tools available that get you moving into the direction you want to get to. It's just a matter of finding the right person, the right combination of things that are going to work for you. So there's always hope.
Fantastic message. Thank you again, Reneau, for coming on the show. Been a great conversation. Very interesting. I've learned some stuff for myself as well, even working in this space, so that's great. And yeah, I think you've gave a valuable message today.
Okay, thank you.